Hi, everybody. Richard Tromans here from Artificial Lawyer. I wanted to tell you a little bit about Legal Innovators California, which is our US event and taking place June 4th and 5th in central downtown San Francisco. I also wanted to introduce you to one of our keynote speakers, Zach Abramowitz. Zach, hi there.
Hi there, Richard. I am Zach Abramowitz. I'm the founder of Killer Whale Strategies. We work with law firms, legal departments, and legal service organizations, all who want to capitalize on the current disruption in the legal industry. And I'm also an investor in several AI for legal startups.
You may have seen our promo video, which we did earlier. We're now going to discuss some of the key themes around generative AI in particular. Zach, I mean, it's now, as we do this, March 2024. ChatGPT came out in November 2022, if I remember correctly.
Yep,
We've had a bit
very
of
good.
time. Where are we now with generative AI?
Well, I think there's different takes. I've seen some people who believe, oh, we're finally getting a reality check. We're at this sort of trough of disillusionment period of AI. I've heard this. I don't think we've. I think we have so much farther to go. I continue, just myself personally, to be blown away by AI tools. I am still very much in the honeymoon. That doesn't mean that I've never put in information to Chat GPT and not gotten the outputs that I wanted and been frustrated by it. Of course, that's happened. But the thing is, Chat GPT has, for me, raised the bar so much in terms of what I expect from my interactions with computers,
Mm.
that it's hard. It's really hard not to be disappointed because the bar is so high now. So that's where I think that we have so much farther to go. And I'll tell you, I've made a very specific investment that that I think reflects that, which is just last week I bought a significant number of shares of Nvidia stock. Right now, if you're of the view that okay, AI has finally peaked, right? But things are going to start to slow down and become much more real, then that investment doesn't look all that smart. But my feeling is we're in the middle of a paradigm shift, and our brains kind of can't comprehend what exponential growth looks like because we haven't experienced it like this. And
Mm.
I believe that we are still very much in the midst of that. And so I don't think that's baked in to the market price for Nvidia. My investment in Nvidia was, to me, the most direct way that if I really believe that we are in this huge revolution, this AI revolution, this watershed tipping point, whatever you want to call it, that we still have a lot farther to go. And I think the most direct way of betting on that right now is betting on Nvidia, the chips that are used to train all these models.
Interesting. Yeah, going back to the infrastructure as a direction. Let's just narrow down to legal tech. I mean, what have you seen? There's been an enormous amount written already about generative AI in the legal sector, but one thing I haven't seen much of yet is any real evidence that lawyers are changing how they work, significantly changing how they work. What have you seen?
So it's hard to measure this at the level of individual lawyers. You'd have to go and start doing surveys within each of the firms to get really good information about that. I did see that Pursuit put out a report that seems to indicate that what I've seen, which is that there is no law firm in the AmLaw 200 or the Global 200 that is saying we're ignoring this. Every single one of them is investing in some way in looking at AI tools,
Mm.
right? So that to me, and generative AI tools specifically,
Mm.
that simply wasn't the case if you look at, those same firms when looking at, what we now call legacy AI, right? Some of the legal technology companies of the last 10 years, the adoption has never been that fast. So I think we are seeing adoption of AI tools inside of the law firm, meaning there's someone who is buying more licenses and piloting and testing. Different firms are doing different things. You're seeing a lot of firms right now that are trying to fine tune their own models. You're seeing many firms right now that are talking about potentially training their own models. So that when you talk about the biggest firms in the world, they're all doing something. Now, does that mean that every single one of their partners are using these tools? No, but it at the very least, it's categorically different than what we've seen prior to now.
Mm. No, no, that's true. That's true. I mean, and in terms of the type of generative AI tool, I guess we could just off the top of my head, I guess we can split that into sort of three or four main groups. So you've got, you might say, the Lexis and the Thomson Reuters of this world, who very, very rapidly, whether through merger or through their own work, have integrated generative AI into, for example, their research products, right?
Right.
Uh, a lot of lawyers will end up using that, probably not even think about it. They'll just be, oh, I'm doing some case law research and, oh, I'm using generative AI. Much as in the same way as 5 years ago, people would have used LexisNexis or Thomson Reuters Westlaw to do some research. And if someone said, hey, did you know you're using NLP? They'd have been like, what's NLP? What are you talking about? There's that. Then I guess there's the products, the actual distinctive legal tech products that are built completely around generative AI. You know, for
Right.
example, say doc review, doc analysis products, which to some degree are almost like the successors to that first wave that came
Yeah.
through 2015, 2016. And then I guess you've got the build your own, working with, for example, like 273 Ventures
Right.
or something like that, where they're effectively adapting a legal specific LLM
Sure.
to their needs.
Is just recently we had this company called Equal.ai that produced a legal specific large language model, and they did it using the infrastructure of Mistral, the French AI company, but not using the same data set on which Mistral was trained. They used only legal data, very legal specific data, and then taught it a bunch of very specific legal instructions. So that's the first that we've ever seen of a legal specific. I mean, I think there have been other vertical specific models developed, but this was the first, and it made me think. That's potentially something that we could see firms do in the future. And right now, that's very expensive, but maybe not. So, but so I think it's again
Mm.
there's so many unknowns, and but there's a lot of upside as well.
Yeah, no, totally. But I mean, as well, just going back to the impact of generative AI. I mean, what kind of impact do you expect to see? Do you expect to see new business models or perhaps new business streams within law firms? Do you expect to see the much hoped for end of a billable hour? I mean, I mean, it's great that people are using this technology, but obviously the next stage after trials and experiments is implementation, follow through, real change in the substance. I mean, what kind of things do you think will actually change?
So I'll give you a few things. First, I think we're going to see, and I think we're seeing this already, massive AI appetites from the buyers of legal services, and by virtue of that, also the outside counsels that are providing those services. So I've seen this already with a company I invested in back in 2018, a company called Legalmation, right? Legalmation was kind of generative AI before it was popular. They allow you to automatically respond to lawsuits. They've now got a whole series of other products where they've automated various stages of the litigation process, like all the way up until discovery. So that entire pre-discovery workflow is covered by Legalmation. Now, Legalmation was doing really nicely before generative AI hit, but now that generative AI has become such a phenomenon in organizations, and because many organizations, there's some other member of the executive team that has now read an article in the Wall Street Journal or in the New York Times about how AI is disrupting legal, now brings this up. And so you have these like top down mandates for legal to become more AI dependent. I've seen this with my own eyes. I've seen instances of other members of the C suite saying, we need some wins as an organization. And we thought it would make a lot of sense to start with legal. Right. So those
Which
renewed,
is a really, really interesting point because,
yeah.
I mean, I've been working in the legal sector for over 2 decades now, and the general view was that in-house counsel are not under any real pressure from a C-suite to change anything. And you could
And which is good
argue,
because they don't have budgets either.
no, and you could argue that that is the primary reason, like the root cause of the lack of innovation. It's not because we don't have people who can do it. It's not because we don't have the technology. There's the will, there's a way, but it's hitting a kind of demand bottleneck, because if the clients are not demanding change, you don't get change. There'll be some innovation, there has been, which of course is what artificial law has been writing about the last
Right.
few years, because it is natural evolution, incremental change. But when, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, whoever says, actually, we're going to do X amount of work in-house now, but we didn't last time because we've got this generative AI capability. And we're actually going to be watching you like a hawk now to see how you're using the technology. And hey, in fact, let's have a talk about the billable hour. Now, we're not there yet. I don't think we're there yet. But if that happens, and it could happen, then all of this will be tremendously interesting. And to some degree, for me, this is what I've been waiting for. You know,
Yeah.
although I am, I am holding my breath because it might not happen, but I think there is a good chance.
So I think it's hard for me to make predictions about billable hours. I think that billable hours are more resilient than many assume for a variety of reasons, most of which ultimately have to do with clients, not their outside counsel.
Absolutely. I mean, well, exactly. This is
But
like it
yeah,
goes back to the buyers. The buyers are powerful, but the buyers are also, how can we put this? They are culturally part of the sellers
sure.
to some degree, if you
Now
see what I mean. And
now
so there's no change there yet.
now what I will say is that law firms are certainly concerned about the following scenario where they propose either a billable hours, they give a timeline, or they say, we're going to, this is the following project plan. And a client comes back to them and says, why are you telling me this is going to take 3 weeks? Someone else told me this can be done in 2 days. That is something that keeps managing partners up at night, right? That's a very, very bad look for a firm and can spoil a client relationship. So they
Mm,
certainly know they've got something to lose. I think what's more interesting to me are some of the firms that think they may have something to gain in all of this. But I think that's also something that we're starting to see, which there are firms who are looking at this every which way and saying, like, how can this help further our own strategic goals? So I think that's something that's fascinating to me.
mm,
I think the other thing that we're seeing, and I think this is starts to become that, like, that next phase of legal technology and business models, are what I refer to as the because AI companies. So you referred to before as some of the AI companies,
mm,
right? And like where this is like a specific AI tool, right? Like a Robin.ai or a Spellbook or a Harvey, where there's these you're basically buying legal AI. And that's interesting. And I think we're seeing a huge amount of adoption within those tools, or something like them. And you mentioned before 273 Ventures and
mm,
others who are, sort of helping create specialized large language model products for law firms. Where those are all like the AI products. What I'm sort of more interested in is like the because AI products, which are companies that have said, like, okay, now that AI is a thing, and effectively you can say draft a contract with the stroke of a button, or you can make revisions very quickly using just natural language. If that's the case, then what is now possible that no one would have even dreamed of? So I think about this like at the internet, the early days of the internet, like CNN.com and ESPN.com were these sort of very obvious use cases, which is I've got like I can look up the box score of the the sports game at in my newspaper. How about that concept just on now I can see it online, right? I could read news, but I have to wait until the morning to get it, or I could read news on your site and it's there the second you put it up. So these were sort of these very, very obvious 1.0 use cases of the internet. They were successful. They got a lot of adoption. Um, However, to me, what's more interesting, and maybe this is just because I'm spoiled by having like lived through it, are the Internet 2.0 companies, companies like Airbnb, companies like
Mm,
Etsy. Like
mm.
the idea that I could very easily become a kind of like crafts person and sell my crafts online, or that I could rent out my spare bedroom. Like
Well,
these were
yeah. I mean,
ideas
I
that
think
no one
exactly. I
dreamed
mean,
of. Yeah.
well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's the kind of force multiplication. You might say the first wave of the internet was effectively just like a giant library, and it shortened the distance. It closed the gap between the information and the person, and it massively increased the speed and the cycle time of information
Yeah.
being created and consumed and then commented upon. And then the next wave really is like a force multiplier on one level in that you can do so much more with it. And I think secondly, the other thing is it starts to genuinely become disruptive for the first time. So Uber, for example, I mean, there are so few black cabs in London now, traditional black cabs. There are very, very, very few of them. They're hard to get. Uber totally disrupted that, but it's clear.
Yeah.
We haven't got there yet. And I think this is the thing. I mean, this is why it's so exciting for me personally to come back now, because I think a lot of what's happened over the last 12 months has been necessary. It's been, you might say, the early growing pains
Yeah.
of this, this second wave of AI. But hopefully now we're actually going to get into something really substantive. And I mean, I
So
cannot believe how amazing it would be if this actually led to real disruption.
yeah. So I'll give you an example, an early example. Now it's from my portfolio. So um, but I'm very proud that I have one company that appears to be trying to essentially pivot into a what I've called the because AI company, and that's Term Scout, which has started a product called Screens.ai. And what they do is they say, listen, now that now that AI exists, it is easier than ever for lawyers to create essentially a set of preferences. And here's how I would look at a contract like the one you need reviewed. And I can basically create my own AI, like take a little part of like my knowledge and distill it down into a screen. You can then upload your contract into that screen and get a first pass review. And they're doing this, and this is the interesting part. There's a business model where they are getting paid for that product, meaning you're going to screens.ai and you're not using the screens.ai official AI to look over your product. You're using a specific lawyer like a David Tollins or like I think Laura Frederick has one up there as well. They've got these other people who have basically are contract experts, and they've created, because it's very easy now with because AI, they can create these screens so that you can get your AI reviewed, you get your contract reviewed, but get it reviewed not by an AI, but this person's specific AI.
Mm,
That to me is like, now we're like, when I hear that idea, I'm like, okay, this almost reminds me of like a Netflix model applied to law, or like an Etsy or an Airbnb model applied to law. And I think there are a lot of lawyers who are thinking about like, how can I actually profit from this? Like, how
mm.
can I be an early adopter of AI where it actually comes back to me. And you think of like, who are the people that became super hosts early on Airbnb? Who are the people that became top creators on Etsy because they got in early? And I think that those are the products that I'm really excited to see,
Mm.
because they're not just, like you said before, like an AI tool. They're like taking that next step and saying, like you said, disrupting business models. This is the kind of tool where I feel like could really disrupt business models.
Yeah, and I like the aspects of personalization because, I mean, at the end of the day, all good lawyers should be experts in their field. And hopefully their answers are not absolutely identical to every single other lawyer who works in that field. There is a degree of, personalization and characterization that belongs
And
to them.
yeah, and I was just writing about this in my newsletter, Legally Disrupted. Um, I I think that you have to meet customers where they are, and I think most businesses even that want a contract reviewed, they still trust a person, not an AI. They trust a person who's using an AI.
Great discussion, Zach. Thank you for that. That's just a bit of a taster of the kind of things we will be discussing at Legal Innovators California on June 4th and 5th in the center of San Francisco. Just to wrap up, Zach, who's going to be giving the keynote, as I mentioned earlier, what is your prediction for generative AI this year? What do you think we're going to see? Just a quick prediction.
Quick prediction is, I think we're going to see a near end to hallucinations. I think this problem by the end of the year is something that we look back on the same way we did the Twitter whale, right? You haven't seen the Twitter whale in years, but it used to be at the very early days of Twitter. The Twitter whale would pop up anytime the service was down because they were serving an unprecedented scale of users. But eventually they figured it out. I think that by the end of this year, we stop talking a whole lot about hallucinations.
Fantastic. Thanks, Zach. That's a great optimistic prediction. Thank you for that. And if you found this discussion interesting or you'd like to know more, you can go and have a look at the website, which is Legal Innovators California. It's a long one, .com. Or come to the Artificial Lawyer website, and there's a whole bunch of links and information about the event there. But that's all for today. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much to Zach. Goodbye.
Thanks, Richard.